The rain had been falling all night, heavy and restless, the kind that turned the Texas highway into a mirror of black water. The gas station at the edge of town was nearly empty, its fluorescent lights buzzing against the storm. Inside, Marcus Brown stood behind the counter, wiping down a coffee pot that no one had touched in hours. He had worked nights here for years, keeping watch while the rest of the town slept. It was close to midnight when he saw them. Two small figures huddled together under the thin awning outside, their clothes soaked through, their hair plastered to their foreheads. They couldn't have been older than a middle school boy and a little girl just starting grade school. Their bare feet pressed against the wet concrete, shivering, waiting, or maybe just hoping someone would notice. Marcus froze, his hand gripping the counter. He knew that look in their eyes, that mixture of fear and hunger. It was the same look he had carried as a boy after his father disappeared, and his mother struggled to keep food on the table. For a moment, the storm outside seemed quieter than the storm rising in his chest. He set the rag aside and walked slowly to the door. The wind pushed back as he pulled it open, rain blowing against his face. The boy stepped forward as if to shield his sister, his chin lifted in a kind of courage no child should have to learn so early. "Come in," Marcus said, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't need to be out there." The girl's lips trembled, and she looked up at her brother for permission. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. They stepped inside, dripping water onto the worn tile floor. The boy held his sister's hand so tightly it was as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Marcus grabbed a couple of old jackets he kept behind the counter for nights like this. Jackets meant for truckers who broke down on the road, not for children, but he wrapped them around the kids anyway. Then he dug into the small refrigerator, pulled out 2 leftover sandwiches, and heated them in the microwave. The smell of warm bread filled the quiet room, and for the first time the girl's eyes softened. He set the food in front of them without asking a single question. No names, no backstory, no judgment, just food and shelter. "Eat," he said softly. "You're safe here tonight." The boy broke the sandwich in half, handing the larger piece to his sister. Her tiny fingers clutched it like it was the most precious thing in the world. They ate in silence, each bite filled with a desperate kind of relief. Marcus watched from behind the counter, his throat tightening, his eyes burning. He didn't know it then, but that small choice, to open a door in the middle of a storm, was about to echo far beyond that lonely Texas night. The storm outside kept rattling the windows, but inside the small gas station there was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes when hunger is finally being eased. The children sat close together at the little table by the window, chewing slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if they finished too quickly. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just leaned against the counter, watching them. Something about the way the boy guarded his sister, sliding the plate closer to her side, made Marcus's chest ache. He had once done the same for his younger brother years ago, long before war and loss had carved the lines into his face. When the girl's tiny hands trembled too much to hold the sandwich, Marcus quietly fetched a spoon and placed it in front of her. She looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, then whispered the first word he'd heard from her all night. "Thank you." It was barely more than a breath, but it carried enough weight to crack something deep inside Marcus. He nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady. For the next hour, the children ate in silence, sipping the hot cocoa he had made from the dusty packets behind the counter. Their cheeks warmed, their eyes grew heavier. Eventually, the girl's head slumped against her brother's shoulder. He kept himself awake, fighting sleep, as if staying alert was the only way to protect her. Marcus walked over and set a folded blanket around them. "Rest," he said quietly. "I'll keep watch." The boy met his gaze, studying him like a soldier sizing up an ally. After a long moment, he allowed himself to lean back, his eyes closing. Marcus stayed awake long after they drifted off. He cleaned the counter, refilled the coffee pot, pretended to busy himself with chores, but every few minutes his eyes went back to them, 2 strangers who somehow felt like family. He wondered where they came from, who had failed them, what kind of road had led them to his door. But he didn't ask. He knew from experience that sometimes questions only made the wounds deeper. When dawn began to break, painting the parking lot in pale grey light, Marcus brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that shimmered like broken glass. For a moment, he thought about how quickly life can change, how one night of kindness might mean the difference between survival and despair. But when he came back inside, the chairs were empty. The blanket folded neatly on the table, the mugs stacked as if the children wanted to leave without leaving a mess. Marcus froze, scanning the room. He hurried outside, searching the lot, the road, the edges of the field. Nothing. They were gone, vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. All that remained was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of cocoa. He stood there for a long time, gripping the folded blanket in his hands, feeling the strange weight of absence. It wasn't just that the children had left, it was the way they left, without a trace, without a goodbye, that left a hollow ache he couldn't explain. Marcus whispered to himself, "Wherever you are, I hope you're safe." What he didn't know then was that their faces, pressed into his memory on that stormy night, would never leave him. And one day, many years later, those same faces would walk back through his door, not as children, but as something far more unexpected. The days moved on, but Marcus carried the memory of that stormy night like a stone in his pocket, always there, heavy, impossible to set down. Every time the bell over the gas station door jingled, he found himself glancing up, half expecting to see the boy and his little sister standing there again. But they never came back. He never spoke of it to anyone. In a small Texas town, people had enough of their own troubles to talk about. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to share the things that lived too close to his heart. He just kept working, pumping gas for strangers, brewing coffee for truckers in the middle of the night, fixing small leaks and squeaky doors that no one else bothered with. Yet every now and then, life sent him small reminders that the world still noticed. One sweltering afternoon, a car broke down just outside the lot. A young mother stood beside it, tears of frustration streaming down her face as her two children sat in the back seat, sweating in the heat. Marcus didn't hesitate. He wiped his hands on a rag, popped the hood, and spent an hour coaxing the old engine back to life. While he worked, he slipped the kids cold bottles of soda from the cooler. Watching them sip and giggle as their mother sighed with relief, Marcus felt a tug deep inside. It was the same look he had seen on another night, in another pair of desperate eyes. Another reminder came in the mail. One morning, tucked between overdue bills and advertising flyers, Marcus found a letter with shaky handwriting and an unfamiliar return address. It was from an old army buddy he hadn't spoken to in years. The note was short, written on lined paper that had been folded and refolded too many times. "I barely made it home. Most days I wonder why. What keeps me going is remembering men like you, steady, dependable, the kind who never left anyone behind. Don't ever think you don't matter, Brown. Men like you are the reason some of us made it." Marcus sat on his bed that night, the letter open in his hands, the quiet hum of the gas pumps below filling the silence. He slid the paper carefully into the back of his old notebook, alongside the 5 words he had written years ago. Don't stop showing up, ever. The world rarely gave him answers. The children he once helped had vanished, and maybe he would never know what became of them. But through strangers, through friends long lost, through moments on the roadside with people who just needed a hand, Marcus kept being reminded of one thing. Even the smallest kindness had a way of rippling outward, even if you never saw where it landed. The gas station had been standing at the edge of town for longer than Marcus could remember. Its walls carried the smell of gasoline and old coffee, its roof patched more times than he could count. To the outside world, it was just another forgotten stop along the highway. But for Marcus, it had become home. So when the owner decided to retire and sell, Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had been working there for years, pouring himself into every shift, treating that place like it was his own. Now, it could be gone overnight, replaced by another chain store with bright signs and no soul. He didn't have the money to buy it, not even close. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to let go without a fight. He met with the bank, sat in an office that smelled like ink and cold air conditioning, and signed papers that scared him more than anything he had faced overseas. He pulled every dollar from his small savings, borrowed from an old army buddy, and prayed he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. When the deal went through, he stood outside the station, staring at the faded sign that still carried the old owner's name. The sun was setting, washing the sky in orange and pink, and Marcus whispered to himself, "It's mine now." He didn't change much, not at first. The pump still rattled, the counter still squeaked when he leaned on it, and the lights still flickered in the back corner. But he added small touches: a fresh coat of paint on the walls, a pot of chili simmering on the stove in winter, a shelf where truckers could leave or take books for free. People noticed. Slowly the gas station stopped being just a stop for fuel. It became a place folks dropped by even when their tanks were half full, just to see Marcus, to hear him ask about their day, to share a coffee in the middle of nowhere. He gave the place a new name, Brown's Stop and Rest. Not flashy, just simple and true. And yet, owning the station wasn't easy. Bills piled up, repairs never ended, and there were nights Marcus sat at the counter staring at overdue notices, wondering if he'd lose it all anyway. He could have given up, let the debt crush him, but he didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe pride, or maybe just that promise he'd written years ago, "Don't stop showing up, ever." Still, there were times when the loneliness pressed harder than the bills. Sitting in that little room above the station, Marcus sometimes imagined the sound of small footsteps running across the floor, laughter echoing down the hall. But the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator below, steady and unchanging. He kept the blanket those two children had left behind folded neatly in his closet. Some nights he'd take it out and hold it, wondering if they had found safety, if they had found someone who cared. It was the only reminder of them he had, and he guarded it like a treasure. The station was his life now, the place he poured his days into, the only corner of the world that truly felt like his. But Marcus had no idea that this small gas station, which he had fought so hard to keep alive, would one day become the stage for a moment that would change everything. The years carried Marcus forward, one steady day at a time. Brown's Stop and Rest slowly became more than just a gas station. On cold mornings, truckers lined up, not just for fuel, but for the smell of biscuits baking in the back. On warm summer nights, families stopped by for sodas and to sit outside under the wide Texas sky, swapping stories with Marcus while cicadas buzzed in the trees. People began to see the place as a kind of anchor, the same way they saw the man who ran it. Marcus didn't make a big show of kindness. He just showed up, every day, every shift, no matter what. But even as the station thrived, Marcus carried a quiet emptiness. When the lights went out and the customers left, he climbed the narrow stairs to his small room above the pumps. The walls smelled of dust and gasoline, the furniture was worn, and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. He kept the blanket from that stormy night folded in his closet. Some evenings, when the loneliness pressed hardest, he would take it out, hold it across his lap, and close his eyes. He could still see the children huddled together, the boy's hand gripping his sister's as though he was the only thing keeping her safe. And sometimes life brought echoes of that memory right back to him. One winter night, a teenager wandered into the station. His clothes were thin, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He didn't ask for anything, just stood there, staring at the candy bars with empty eyes. Marcus poured a cup of cocoa from the old machine, set it on the counter, and slid one of his jackets across to the boy. "You're safe here," Marcus said gently. The teenager's eyes widened as if no one had said those words to him in a long time. He took the cup, nodded once and whispered, "Thank you, sir." By morning he was gone. Marcus leaned on the counter that day, staring at the empty cup the boy had left behind. It was just one small moment, one quiet night among thousands, but it stirred something deep. He realized the same story had been replaying in his life again and again. Strangers coming and going, broken people stopping by, each of them carrying pieces of pain he recognized. And all he could do was show up, open the door, and offer whatever little he had. It wasn't much, but it was what he could give. Marcus sometimes wondered if any of it mattered, if these moments disappeared into silence the second the doors closed. He had no way of knowing that every act, every quiet gesture, was shaping a legacy he couldn't yet see. The hardest years didn't come with warning. They slipped in quietly, like a draft under a door. Gas prices rose and fell, new stations opened closer to the highway, and more travellers passed by without stopping. Marcus felt it in every red stamp on the bills that landed on his counter. He had fought through worse before, but this time it felt like the ground was slowly being pulled out from under him. Then came the night he would never forget. It was late, close to closing, when the door flew open and a man stumbled in. His clothes were dirty, his eyes bloodshot, and the smell of alcohol filled the small station. He slammed a hand on the counter and shouted for cash. Marcus's heart pounded, but he stayed still, watching carefully. He saw more than just anger in the man's face. He saw exhaustion. He saw hunger. He saw the kind of desperation that pushed people to the edge. And so, instead of reaching for the bat under the counter, or the silent alarm by his knee, Marcus quietly opened the register and slid out a small stack of bills. "Take it," he said softly, "but don't let any child of yours go hungry because of this." The man froze, his hand trembling as he grabbed the money. For a second, his hard eyes flickered with something else, shame, maybe, or recognition. Then he bolted into the night, leaving Marcus standing alone in the hum of fluorescent light, his chest heavy, his hands shaking. When the sheriff came by later, Marcus refused to press charges. "He's fighting something I can't see," he said quietly, and that was the end of it. But the next morning, when Marcus came down to open the station, he noticed an envelope shoved under the door. Inside was a crumpled $20 bill and a scrap of paper with 2 words written in shaky handwriting: "Thank you." Marcus stood at the counter for a long time, staring at the note. His throat tightened, and without a word, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his old notebook, right beside the letter from his army buddy and those 5 faded words: "Don't stop showing up, ever." He still didn't know if the world truly noticed his efforts. But every so often, moments like this reminded him that kindness had a way of circling back, sometimes in the smallest, quietest forms. And what Marcus didn't know then was that the greatest return of all was already on its way. The doors of this very gas station would soon open again, not to danger, but to faces from his past that would change everything. It was an ordinary morning, the kind Marcus had lived through 1,000 times before. The sun was just beginning to push light over the horizon, the air still cool with the last touch of night. Marcus brewed the first pot of coffee, the rich smell filling the station as he wiped down the counter and checked the pumps. The world outside was calm, almost too calm, like the pause before something you can't quite name. Then he heard it, a low hum of an engine pulling into the lot. Marcus glanced out the window, expecting the usual pickup truck from a farmer or a tired delivery van. But this one was different. A shiny truck rolled in, new enough that it stood out against the worn gravel of his lot. The doors opened and 2 figures stepped out. A man in a dark suit, polished but not flashy, stood tall with the kind of confidence Marcus didn't often see in this small town. Beside him was a young woman in a crisp white coat, her hair pulled back neatly, her steps light but sure. They paused just outside the door, their eyes scanning the building as if it were more than just a gas station, like it was something sacred. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Something about them tugged at his memory, though he couldn't place it. The man pushed the door open, and the bell jingled the same way it had on countless mornings. But this time, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The man's eyes landed on him, and for a moment, the room was silent. He smiled, a slow, trembling smile, and Marcus saw it then, the shape of his jaw, the familiar eyes, the way he stood just a little protectively in front of the woman beside him. The stranger's voice caught as he spoke. "Sir, you probably don't remember us." Marcus froze, rag still in his hand. His heart kicked against his chest. Something deep inside him, something buried under years of work and silence, stirred to life. The man's voice broke, softer now. "But you saved our lives." Marcus gripped the counter, his mind flashing back to a stormy night. 2 soaked children, a sandwich, a blanket, a promise he never let himself forget. And now, after all these years, they were standing right in front of him. For a long moment, Marcus couldn't find words. He just stared at them, his hand frozen on the counter, as if time itself had stopped inside that little gas station. The young man stepped closer, his voice unsteady. "My name is Elijah. This is my sister, Anna. We were just kids the night you found us here. I was the boy who stood in front of her trying to be brave. She was the little girl in the purple hoodie. You gave us food and a place to rest, and more than that, you gave us hope." Anna's eyes were already wet with tears. She reached into her bag and pulled out something carefully wrapped in tissue. She unfolded it slowly, and there it was, the same faded hoodie, small now in her grown hands, but still carrying the weight of that night. "I kept this," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for 20 years, because it reminded me that not everyone turned their back on us, that one man cared enough to open a door." Marcus's throat tightened. He pressed a hand against his chest as though steadying himself. He remembered every detail, the storm, the trembling hands, the quiet thank you. He had wondered for years if they had even survived. And now they were standing before him, alive, strong, successful. Elijah went on. "After that night, we ended up in foster care. It wasn't easy. We moved from house to house, sometimes treated well, sometimes not. But we never forgot. When things got dark, we'd remind each other, there's good in this world, because someone once showed us. That memory carried us through." Anna nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm a pediatric doctor now. I fight for kids who don't always have someone to fight for them." "And Elijah, he's a lawyer who works with families in the foster system. We chose these lives because of you." Marcus's hands shook. He leaned on the counter, his voice rough with disbelief. "All I did was give you a sandwich and a place to sit." Elijah smiled through his tears. "To you, maybe, but to us, it was the difference between giving up and holding on." For the first time in years, Marcus felt his eyes fill. He had spent so long wondering if his life made any difference at all. And now, here they were, the proof that a single night, a single act, had echoed across decades. The little gas station was silent again. But it wasn't the silence of loneliness this time. It was the silence of hearts connecting, of a promise fulfilled, of something that had waited 20 years to come full circle. Marcus's hands still trembled as he held the folder Elijah had slid across the counter. Inside were neat pages stamped with seals and signatures, too official looking for him to understand at first glance. But at the very top, printed in bold letters, were the words, "The Brown Scholarship Fund." His brow furrowed, eyes darting back to Elijah. "What is this?" he whispered. Elijah's voice was steady but full of emotion. "It's a foundation we started in your name. Every year, it will give foster kids across Texas a chance at college, a chance at a future. Kids like us who need someone to believe in them. We want them to carry your name as a reminder that kindness can last." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat aching. You didn't have to..." Anna gently reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. Her eyes shone as she said, "That night you gave us more than food. You gave us a reason to hope. We promised ourselves if we ever made it, we'd come back for you." Elijah nodded and opened a second envelope. "We've also arranged to clear your debts. You won't ever lose this place, and more than that, we want to help expand it. This station saved us once, so we'll turn part of it into a community space, for tutoring, for hot meals, for anyone who needs to feel safe." Marcus shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. All I did was give you something to eat and a place to rest." Elijah stepped closer, his eyes burning with tears. "No, you said something that night. You looked at us and said, 'You're safe here.' We held on to those words for 20 years. Whenever things got too hard, whenever the world felt cruel, Anna and I reminded each other. Once, a stranger told us we were safe. And if it was true once, maybe it could be true again." Marcus pressed a hand to his face, his eyes wet. He hadn't even remembered saying it. But hearing it repeated back now, all these years later, It felt like the seed of a tree that had grown far beyond what he ever imagined. For years he had wondered if any of it mattered, if his small acts disappeared into silence the moment the doors closed. And now, standing here with Elijah and Anna, he finally saw the truth. Kindness never vanishes. It lives on, carried by the lives it touches, waiting to return in ways you cannot predict. The news spread faster than Marcus could have imagined. By the end of the week, the gravel lot of Brown's Stop and Rest was filled with cars, laughter, and the smell of barbecue. Neighbours carried paint cans and brushes. Children ran in circles while their parents hammered new boards into the porch, and a banner stretched across the front of the building. Brown's Haven, a place of second chances. Marcus stood beneath it, wearing his old flannel shirt freshly pressed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He had never been comfortable in the spotlight, but this day wasn't about him alone. It was about what kindness had built. Elijah spoke to the crowd, his voice carrying with quiet strength. This man gave us hope when we had none. He opened a door on a stormy night and told 2 frightened children they were safe. Because of him, we survived. And today, we honour him by making sure no one in this town ever feels forgotten. Cheers rose from the crowd, but Marcus's eyes were fixed on Anna. She was holding the hand of a little boy, no older than 7, who hesitated before walking up to Marcus. The child tugged at his sleeve and asked softly, "Are you the man who helped my mum when she was little?" Marcus knelt down, his throat tight, and managed to say, "Yes, son, I guess I was." The boy's smile was small but pure, and Marcus felt something he hadn't in years, a warmth spreading through his chest, a sense that his life had never been wasted. As the sun dipped lower, neighbours gathered around him, some with paint still on their hands, others carrying trays of pie and cornbread. One of the older men clapped Marcus on the shoulder and said, "You carried us for a long time, Marcus. Today, let us carry you." For the first time, Marcus wasn't just the one giving, he was being given back to by Elijah and Anna, by the child who now looked at him as a hero, and by an entire town that had quietly been waiting for the chance to show their gratitude. He looked around at the freshly painted walls, at the laughter in the air, at the people who had come together not just for him but for one another. And in that moment, Marcus finally felt what it meant to belong. He whispered more to himself than anyone else, "Kindness doesn't disappear. It waits, and one day it finds its way home." And this time, he wasn't alone. Lesson. Even the smallest act of kindness can echo across time. You may not see its impact today, but one open door, one gentle word can change a life. And someday, that kindness will find its way back to you. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and your heart. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need hope today. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.